All right, welcome back everyone. I'm Richard, still, and this is still very little evolutionary game theory. Today's topic is the evolution of cooperation. But before I introduce that, I want to remind you what we did last time, just a little bit. Remember, last time we focused on this classic hawk-dove game of conflict, right? So my innovation today is colored, by the way. You like that? Yeah. This is high-tech as I get. And in the hawk-dove game, the pairs of individuals contest a resource, this value V. If the fight escalates and they use their natural weaponry, this entails a cost of injury C. So we write the payoff matrix in this game. What's this? Yes, this is seared into your brainstem now. Yeah? You dreamt about it repeatedly over the last week. Yes. Okay. I hope you didn't. But if you did, good. What I want to talk about in this game is this game is the classic model of conflict. But whether it's conflict or cooperation is really a matter of perception. It's just as much a game about cooperation as it is about conflict. What I mean by cooperation. Cooperation is one of these words that has a bunch of meanings in natural language, but in the scholarly literature it tends to mean individuals choosing a behavior at a personal cost that creates joint benefits for a larger group. Yeah, that's what it tends to mean. But of course in natural, everyday English it can mean almost anything, right? But in scholarly literature it tends to mean that. There's an individual cost that is paid, and there's some collective benefit, or benefit for some other individual. Yeah, and so there's this conflict between the interests of the individual, how they can achieve their own goals, and the interests of the group. And it's weird to talk about the interests of the group, because groups aren't agents, and they don't have interests. But what we mean is, as soon as natural selection is frequency dependent, as it is in this game, and all the other games we'll look at in this short course, the group is the frequency of strategies. And so individuals have interests in the group because the frequencies of strategies influence their own payoff. So think of it, well, let me pause on the point I was about to make and draw up the thing about the hawk-dove game, and then I'll introduce another version of this game that will look a lot more like cooperation. This is a cooperation game, even though you think about it as conflict, because dove is a cooperative strategy. Yeah. So imagine a population of doves. Remember, they're not evolutionarily stable against hawk. Yeah, there's nothing doves can do to stop the first hawk from coming in. The first hawk that arises in the population is just like, oh wow, this is easy pickings, right? I'm just going to get whatever I want. That's a non-cooperative strategy because the individual's interest, the individual hawk's interest, is to get the whole resource. But the consequence of that is it creates a group that hawks don't want to live in. I'll say that again. The consequence of that is that it leads inevitably to an evolutionary dynamic of hawk increasing in frequency. This is where I try to do my color thing again. Remember the evolutionary dynamics. We have hawks over there, doves over here. Doves are never stable. Yeah, either there's some mixed equilibrium here at V over C, that the population equilibrates to, or you just go all the way to the all-hawk world, right? Remember this? And so this outcome is a non-cooperative outcome. Because the population, the group, is better off if everybody would just play dove, but they can't agree to do that because evolution's acting on the individual interests of the first hawk, and that just increases hawks. If I convinced you this is a cooperation game, yeah, it's about cooperation, and the failure here, and this is a general feature of evolution under frequency dependence, is that you get this conflict between what maximizes the population growth rate, which would be everybody playing dove, that's the cooperative outcome, right? It maximizes the benefits of the group, of the pairs, versus what selection does at the individual level, which is make hawks. But it doesn't necessarily make all hawks. Lots of interesting stuff can happen under frequency dependence, depending upon the exact nature of the conflict between individual and group interests. You buy it for the moment? Yeah? Okay. New game. Now I want to think about a game that I call the patrol game. So imagine pairs of individuals occupy a common territory. Don't ask why. This is a game theory course. So it's a scenario that resembles lots of problems. Individuals occupy a common territory, and there are resources in the territory that they share. There are individuals who want to come into your territory and take those resources. Eat your fruit. Yeah, there are primatologists in the audience, right? So this is the thing primate groups have to deal with. Those other groups want to eat your fruit. Nasty, really nasty. So patrolling helps. You patrol the boundaries, you can scare the other individuals away. So we're going to imagine that this is the game, and there are two behaviors, just to keep it simple: resting and patrolling. And we'll just keep it to a pair of individuals for now. You can generalize all these games so that it's bigger than pairs. It's groups of 3 or 4 or 5 or 20. But just to keep the thinking easy, let's just stick with pairs for the moment. And so 2 options: rest and patrol. Yeah, and when both pairs of individuals rest, I'm going to set the change in fitness to 0. This is just to set the reference, right? So there's some loss of resource, but that's going to come in a second when I define a benefit. Yeah, this just means there's no change. Sort of the state of nature is laziness. Yeah. If the focal individual rests and the other patrols, patrolling creates a benefit B, which is more fruit that the pair shares, right? So your individual share of that is little b, so positive benefit. Yeah? And you don't pay any cost, you just get that benefit B. Because you rested, right? So this benefit has been created for you. Sounds nice, right? If you patrol, now it's the flip side of that dyad. Yeah, you're the one who patrols, the focal individual patrols, and the other individual rests. You also get B, because there's a common benefit produced. There's more fruit in your neighborhood. Yeah. But you also pay a cost to produce it. It's the cost of patrolling. There's other things you could have done with that time. You could have saved your energy. Yeah. Does this make sense? So,
sorry?
Yes,
One
question.
question. What exactly is this scenario here? So the resting and the patrolling individual are within the same population?
They're in a pair. This is a pair of individuals who occupy a common territory.
Okay, so no opponent conflict.
Well, this is where I'm going. This is, the punchline's coming. Just hang on. All right. One more square. Yeah, and then we're going to analyze this game. And you're all professional game theorists now after the first lecture, right? So you're prepared to analyze this with me. Yeah. Last square, if you both patrol, the same benefit is created, but the individual pays half the cost. Why? Because this is the assumption I want to make, and we're going to analyze this game. You could choose lots of different things, right? And if you were going to do an empirical study, you want to measure what happens empirically when both individuals patrol. How does it reduce the cost to the individual? Yeah? But for the sake of this example, I'm just going to assert it's arithmetic. You pay half the cost. Could be different, right? Okay. Does this make sense? Any questions about the structure of it? No? Yeah, question back.
Is the benefit shared amongst the individuals, or is it like
B is one individual's share of the collective benefit. Remember, the payoffs go to the focal individual on the rows.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's like 2B is produced, and each individual gets B. Does that make sense? Yeah, that's a great question, because if you scale these games up to like groups of 20 or something, you've got to think about that very carefully, about the size of the benefit that's produced and how it's shared. Yeah, because then the individual shares decline rapidly. Yeah, in these situations. Okay. So, wait, I wanted to write that this is the patrol game right up here. All right, let's analyze this game. So first, is patrol stable? When is it evolutionarily stable? When is it an ESS? Yeah, it's not a term that I like, but evolutionarily stable. Yeah. And you will remember from the hawk-dove game how to do this, right? You imagine a population that's all patrol. You figure out the payoff that a patrol individual gets in that population, and then you ask when that's greater than the payoff to a rare resting individual. So let's do that. The payoff to a common patrol is patrol. Yeah. And that needs to be greater than the payoff to a rare rest, which is B. I probably don't need to do any algebra to convince you that's not satisfied. Ever. Well, again, to be a pedant, which I am, if C were negative, right, so that the cost were actually a benefit, then that could be satisfied, but that's silly, right, but again, I am a pedant, so I must mention that result. Yeah? So this is never satisfied. And now let's think about why biologically. It's because the resting individual, their sloth, increases the cost to the other individual in the pair that they're in, but it does nothing to reduce the benefit they enjoy. Yeah? It's just the other individual patrols more vigorously and it produces the same benefit. Yeah? Does that make sense? And so, patrol is never evolutionarily stable. Okay? When is rest stable? Same mental gymnastics. Again, think about it when we're asking about evolutionary stability. You're always doing this odd comparison. At least it's odd until you get used to doing this. You're comparing the common strategy against itself to the rare strategy against the common strategy. Yeah, the common strategy against itself to the rare strategy against the common strategy, right? Because the rare strategy doesn't meet itself. At least not yet. That's the second half of today's lecture. But I'll show you when the rare strategy meets itself. But that's coming later. Yeah, so rest against rest is 0. Is 0 greater than a rare patrol against rest, which is B minus C. And that requires B less than C. So when the benefit of patrolling is less than the cost of patrolling by yourself, which is what C means, then there will be no patrolling. And this is the tragedy of cooperation. Yeah? Is that lots of cooperation scenarios. So again, this is what you look at this game and it really smells like cooperation, doesn't it? All of your ideology kicks in. Now you're angry at rest. Yeah, I am. It's okay. This is a safe place we can talk like that here. So, but no, it kicks in. You're people, right? And you have ideology about this. That rest is bad. This is bad, right? Now, as a biologist, you suppress that and you just analyze the situation, of course. Yeah, but you feel this feels like a cooperation problem. It really doesn't. And in many cooperation problems, not all of them, many of them, this is the basic tragedy: is that when cooperative strategies are rare, it's very, very difficult for them to increase. Yeah? Very, very difficult for them to increase because they only do well when they're paired with other cooperative strategies. And when they're rare, that happens only very rarely. Make some sense? And that's the tragedy that goes on here. And so B isn't necessarily less than C. This is a condition. But if B is less than C, you will get no patrolling in this population. And in that situation, this game is an example. So, get no cooperation, and this is an example of something called a prisoner's dilemma. Which some of you have heard of before. Yeah, this is kind of a famous term of art, at least in the social sciences, when you study cooperation. A prisoner's dilemma is a strategic scenario, usually expressed as a cooperative scenario, in which there is a perfect opposition between the interests of individuals and the interests of the group. Individuals are always better off by not cooperating. It doesn't matter how common cooperation is. So the way to think about this, let's look at this matrix again. Yeah? And we're going to take each column one at a time, because that imagines different extreme frequencies of cooperation. So in the situation where everybody's resting, if B is less than C, then you're better off resting. Right? Because this is bigger than that. Right? Because this will be negative. Yeah? So if an individual is looking at the rest column and deciding omnisciently what they wanted to do, if they wanted to switch from patrolling to resting, they would improve their individual welfare by switching to rest. Likewise, in the patrol column, you want to compare B minus C over 2 to B. B is bigger, and so you're better off resting. That's a feature of the prisoner's dilemma. No matter how common cooperation is, an individual, if they can unilaterally change their behavior, does better by not cooperating. However, I said the interests of the group are perfectly opposed to this. At any frequency of cooperation, the group is better off on average if individuals switch to cooperation. Right? Average welfare will increase, and the population is best off when everybody patrols. But evolution can't produce that in this game. So I told you so I tried to set up last lecture, this is the curse of frequency dependence, is you get these evolutionary outcomes which are not good for the species. Yeah, in any kind of classic sense. Now this is not inevitable, don't be sad, but we know cooperation evolves. It's just that you have to think about mechanisms that allow it to happen, and I'm setting the stage, right? This is the first act of the play, right? Setting up the conflict, introducing the characters. No, does that metaphor not work for anybody? One person, okay. I'll keep trying. All right, so the prisoner's dilemma gets its name from some weird story about two prisoners who've been put in separate interrogation rooms and they're offered plea deals. And I'm not going to recite that story for you because no one understands it anymore. But unless you watch Creamies or something, right? But it comes from social scientists. But it refers to this kind of strategic situation. And the details of the payoff matrix can vary. What makes it a prisoner's dilemma is when individuals are unilaterally better off by non-cooperation, always. That's what makes it a prisoner's dilemma. This is a very extreme kind of cooperation model. And there are less extreme ones, and we're going to look at them next. But I want to pause and invite you to ask some questions if there are some right now. No? Okay. Now, when B is greater than C, what happens in this game? I'll give you a moment to think about it. Yeah? Because you are game theorists now. Yes, you are. When B is greater than C, rest is not stable. And some patrolling will come in. And you'll end up with a mixed population of resting and patrolling. There's still a conflict between individual interests and group interests in that case. Right? There's still an undersupply of cooperation. But it's not as extreme as the prisoner's dilemma case. And those are also cooperation models. When that's true, in this model, when B is greater than C, this game is the hawked-up game. It has all the same qualitative evolutionary dynamics. You get a mixed equilibrium of patrol and rest. You can solve for it. I leave that as an exercise to the student. Yeah? But I think it's in the notes. It'll look just like, so rest is hawk and patrol is duck. Yeah? And now it's a conflict game. Yeah, so these labels we put on these scenarios, like cooperation and conflict, they're things that evoke our moralism about them. But part of the trick in doing game theory is to kind of peer beneath that and think about this mathematical structure so that you can understand more about the general evolutionary processes. And that's really hard, I think. I think that's one of the hardest things about it. It gets really hard when you analyze people, right? Because then it's very difficult to analyze human behavior without feeling morally activated, right? But it's part of the analyst's duty. It's really hard. Okay, do you believe me that this is the hawked up game? Yeah, I know this is a bit strange, but it's hawked up. And so these conflict cooperation scenarios are mathematically the same thing, And this comes back to this basic issue that there's a conflict of interest. There's a conflict between the individual interests and the group interests. Yeah, and the group interest meaning what structure of the group would maximize the average welfare of individuals, which is of course an individual interest, but it's longer term. It acts on a longer term time scale than the short term individual interest of whether a hawk can be made or whether rest can be made. Good? Okay. I'm looking for nodding from you folks. I apologize because I'm trying to pace it and I don't want to move forward. Yeah, question?
It's easy for me to imagine conflict between two individuals, but in a more realistic scenario, cooperation would involve the whole group. So C over 2, I guess that's between two individuals, right? But in reality, the cost could be shared by all the individuals in the group, and so the cost would it would have a lesser impact. Is that correct?
Yeah, well, you make a different model with different assumptions. I would call them economic assumptions about how the labor, the patrol, this thing called the production function, if we do microeconomics with this stuff, and you have to make assumptions about that. Yeah, you have to draw that out. And you can generalize all these games. It's what's called n-person game theory, where the n is just some number greater than 2. And then, yeah, you have to answer a bunch of difficult questions about how these things scale, yeah, and how the benefits are distributed and so on. But there's lots of work on that. And I would like to mention n-person game theory. Maybe I won't get to it today, but in a later lecture, because it does change the dynamics of some very important games. So I think maybe I'll do it next. Well, we're not going to meet next week because it's fall break, so we'll meet in 3 weeks, right? The calendar on the course website. I'm going to do repeat interaction in the next lecture. So then I call it the evolution of relationships. And pairwise relationships evolve very differently than in-person relationships. You have to use what an in-person relationship is, as well as this classroom. Right? So it's, you can't, the strategies that do well in pairwise conflicts don't tend to work well in in-person conflicts. And so I want to draw that out for you, but I'm going to punt on it. But your question's great, because thinking through those things, like if you get interested in some social or biological phenomenon, often the pairwise example is easiest to think through, but it's very misleading. And so I'm not promising you that this is going to deliver all of the intellectual payoff that you need here. But I want to be clear on that. Okay, I should write a note here about this. So PD means individual always better off non-cooperative. Yeah. Okay. There's a mathematical definition, you can look it up on Wikipedia. But this is the intuition I want you to take away that will stick with you. Okay. Okay. Let's do another game that's less extreme. Let's think about a classic game where again, it's a pair of individuals, to keep it simple. And we're going to imagine that these individuals, again, occupy a common territory, and they need to go foraging. And there are two kinds of things the individuals can go foraging for. They can go foraging for some safe option. That's the first behavior I'm going to write down here. I'm going to call this game right here. This game is called the stag hunt. It's a famous game in sociology. And so there are two options. First is safe. I'm going to draw payoff matrix. When both individuals choose safe, focal individual gets a small payoff little beat. So this is like putting out, in the classic story, this is putting out snares for hares. Hare, like rabbit, right? Yeah? And so there are lots of rabbits out there. There are a bunch around this institute, by the way, but please don't set snares for them. Yeah? See them hopping across the parking place all the time. Yeah? And there's also another option, which we're going to call the risky option, for reasons that will become clear in a moment. And the risky option is something more challenging. In the classic story, it's a stag. Yeah? And the thing about hunting a stag is it's hard. And in particular, the stag can get very angry with you. Yeah, and even though stags, when they fight one another, they engage in display contests where they basically wrestle with their antlers. When they encounter a predator, they engage in a much more aggressive use of the antlers. Right? So they're real weapons in that case. So this is the risky option. In this story, if you do safe and your partner does the risky thing, you still get little B because you set your rabbit snares and you were like, oh no, I'm not going near that stack, right? And you let your partner go for it. If you do go for the risky thing and your partner is safe, you get some lower payoff. And just for the sake of convenience, I'm going to assign that to be 0. But it could be dead, right? Let's just call it 0, which is no change. It just sets what B means, right? And then if you both pursue risky, then you succeed at some rate, and you get each individual gets a payoff large B, which, as you can tell because it's large, is bigger in value than little b. Yeah? Does this make sense? So this is a classic game to study a ton in philosophy and sociology. Goes back hundreds of years. It's called the stack hunt. And I think this was in the Leviathan. Is that right? I think this was in the Leviathan. It's older than that. And it's a game that predates modern game theory, in fact, but it was analyzed truly verbally in lots of classic philosophy texts. We're going to analyze it mathematically, because that's the kind of guy I am. Yeah. So what we want to do with this is the same stuff as before. We're going to ask, when is each strategy evolutionarily stable? And then what happens in the middle? Yeah. Okay. So first then, when is safe stable? And I think you already get a sense that these games are not the same. Yeah. Particularly there's a 0 in a really different location. So when is safe stable? So when safe is common, it gets little b. And that needs to be greater than what a rare risky gets. And what does a rare risky get? 0. Yeah? And that's true. So safe is always stable. Now, safe is not exactly non-cooperative, right? But it is kind of, right? It feels different, doesn't it? This is a cooperation game, but of a different sort. Well, I'll draw out the lesson for it as we finish this column. Yeah, but safe is not defecting on some kind of social contract necessarily, right? They're just playing it safe. Yeah, and you can't hunt stag by yourself. You've got to get the other individual on board. You need to cooperate with the other individual. And natural selection doesn't have a way to take a rare, risky individual and make it come in unless we make a model of communication and all the other fun stuff, right? Which is the point of a game like this, is you start thinking about the mechanisms. Right? Okay. When is risky stable? Same idea. When risky is common, it gets big B. And that needs to be greater than what? What's a rare safe get? It's easy because safe always gets the same thing. Yeah? It's like a totally asocial strategy. Just set snares in the parking lot that the Mox Pong hits the food and catches in a rabbit. Don't do this. Okay. We like our bunnies. They frolic around in our parking lot. Right? Best part of our day. So, it's little b. Yeah? And this is always true, by assumption of the game, is that big B is a larger payoff than little b. Okay, so both strategies are always stable in this game. Which means, if we start in the state of nature with everybody playing it safe, natural selection can't produce the risky option, but the population would be better off if they did. This is the problem with evolutionary dynamics, is you can't just jump, right? You can't just jump to the better equilibrium. In some versions of economic game theory, you can, because the idea is individuals think about the equilibria, and then they imagine where they'd rather be. Yeah? Now, I don't know what sort of society you live in, but that's not the sort of society you live in. Right? Things are much more complicated than that. Economists know that, right? This is like really classic game theories like that. Okay. But there's something interesting that's going to happen in the middle here that I want to draw out now. So when this is true, you've got a two-strategy game, and both strategies are always stable. This implies that somewhere in the middle, there is an equilibrium, like with the hawk dove. So remember with hawk dove, this is an equilibrium. Yeah, it's an equilibrium because the strategies do equally well at this point. They get the same average fitness. That's called an equilibrium. But this is a stable equilibrium. It's where evolution goes. This game also has an equilibrium in the middle, but it's unstable. And we want to analyze that now, because lots of games, especially cooperation games, have unstable internal equilibria. And you often want to know where they are, because they define these things called, where's my orange chalk? There it is. These things called basins of attraction. Basins of attraction.
Richard?
Yes,
So
please.
a very ignorant question. What's an equilibrium if it's not stable?
Still an equilibrium. Equilibrium is any value of all the state variables. There's only one state variable here. It's a proportion of the population that is, say, hawk here. It's any value of that proportion at which the fitness of both strategies is equal. So that will still be true here, and we're going to solve it exactly the same way. But it's unstable, meaning if we perturb the population a little bit to either side, natural selection runs away from the point. In this case, if you perturb it to either side, it runs back. And that makes it stable. That make sense? Yeah, this is the cool stuff. Lots of fun. Okay, so let's figure out. So basins of attraction are the regions of what we call the state space, right? So this is, the states in these models are the proportions of the population that are each strategy. What proportions of risky lead to the evolution of risky? What proportions lead to the evolution of safe? And we're going to map that out mathematically, yeah, because we like precision, right? We start with these very vague qualitative stories, but then we get really precise and quantitative with them, and then we try to extract some qualitative lessons from them. So it's like we start out as qualitative thinkers in game theory, we become quantitative thinkers in the midpoint, do lots of algebra, yeah, make some graphs, but we want qualitative generalizable insights from these little moral tales, right? These stage plays. Okay, so what we need to do is write expressions for the average fitness of each strategy at any frequency of risky. Is that hand in the back?
Yeah. So I just wanted to ask, is the hawk-dove equilibrium point, is that also a basis of attraction?
Usually you wouldn't say that because what happens everywhere goes to this point on this line. So there's no, if these are stable, you talk about regions that go to the ends, and that's what we're going to see now. Yeah. But fundamentally, it's a hedge there because fundamentally it's the same thing. There's some long-term outcome and there's some range of conditions that lead to it. It's just in this case, the whole line is the basis of attraction for this equilibrium. But no one would say that. Right? But it's perfectly fine. Okay, so we need to write expressions for the average fitness of each strategy for any frequency of risky. We're going to let P be the frequency of risky. It's arbitrary. You could also do it for safe. You just have to write the expressions correctly. Yeah. So let's do it for risky. So P at a time, if you're a risky individual, you meet another risky individual, and you get big B. Yeah. This is all just, applied probability theory. Yeah. The rest of the time, you meet a safe individual, and that's very sad for you. Okay? So that's the average fitness of risky in a population where a proportion P of the population is risky. Yeah? And we're going to set this equal to the expression for safe. Now we could do the same thing. There would be two terms in it. It would be P of the time they meet a risky, and 1 minus P of the time they meet a safe. But look, safe always gets B, so there's no point in doing any math here. Let's just write B down. Yeah? Little b, as the case was. Okay? You see why I can just jump to that? Because if you have should write this marginally somewhere. If you have PB plus 1 minus PB, that equals B. Yeah? B at the time you get B, the rest of the time you get B. You're getting B. That's all that's going to happen here. Yeah? So we could just jump to this. So there it is. Okay. And now we solve for B, right? So we've got B. Oh, this whole thing is 0, right? This is easy. There's no algebra to do here at all. PB equals B. B equals little b over big B. Yeah? All right. Let's chart out what's going on here. So this is an equilibrium point, and we've got this line. And over here, we've got risky. Over here, we've got safe. Right? This is p equals 0. And this is p equals 1 over here. And we've got some point in the middle here at p equals little b over big B. This equilibrium point. But we know that the ends are stable. The local evolution dynamics near p equals 0 and p equals 1 lead you back to those ends, right? Because rare safe can't invade and rare risky can't invade. And this is the weird puzzle about this game, right? The population would be better off if you could just pick it up and drop it here. And then that would be stable because perturbations would move you back. But you got to get over this point, right? So where this point is matters a lot because it defines how hard it will be for long-term evolution. Remember, there are other forces than natural selection. Natural selection is hopeless in this game. But there are other forces like migration, and migration is really powerful in a structured population. You get a flood of risky individuals into a population, and then it could push you across this point, things like that. So we want to know where this point is, because we want to know how likely it is that those other forces could get us across it. But it's locally unstable, so that if you balance the population at exactly this point, natural selection will do nothing. But it can't stay there, right? Because other things are happening. A little bit of mutation, a little bit of drift. It's a finite population, an ounce of migration, yeah, some developmental instability. Remember, these strategies aren't, in these games, we imagine the strategies are perfectly heritable, but there's nothing like that in a real animal, right? In a reality, behavior like this would be massively polygenic and just a mess. Just like our own behavior, right? That's what it would really be. But this is an idealized way to think through the implications. Okay, so this is a case where we get these two basins of attraction. So we've got one basin of attraction here, yeah, and this is the basin, it's called, the bucket, right? It's just the range of values that lead to this point over here. And then you've got the basin for risky. Yeah, the range of values that lead to risky. And so if you make little b very small, it pushes this point this way, right? Because the fraction gets smaller. And so if this is, say, 1 over 10, it's going to be way over here. And then it doesn't seem like a horrible situation to be in, right? The stag is so much bigger than the Max Planck parking lot rabbit. Yeah, it's just much, much bigger. And in that case, you may not need a lot, right? Local populations are small, you might just need drift. That would be perfectly sufficient, right? It's polygenic, some drift, you could get across that point. It's not so unimaginable. But if the point is over here, it's like a half or something like that, then you're in trouble, yeah? The population's in trouble, and it's harder to imagine how to do that, yeah? Likewise, if you got to imagine that populations that are here, they're in danger of falling across to the left, and they don't want that. Yeah. Does this make sense? So the stat hunt is a cooperation game, and I think you want to think about it that way. But it's usually called a coordination game. It's a coordination because individuals don't always do better by non-cooperation. If we call risky the cooperative outcome, which doesn't quite feel right, but if we call it that, then if risky is common, you should do risky. There's no conflict at that point. Yeah? So it's not like the prisoner's dilemma, because remember, in the prisoner's dilemma, no matter what the other individual does, you're better off not cooperating. And that's not true here. This is more like, well, if you could be sure that your partner was going to take the risky option, you should do it too. And if you were sure your partner wouldn't, then you shouldn't. And those are situations of matching incentives, where your incentive is to match the behavior of your partner. Yeah, and your partner has the same incentives. So you need some way to communicate this. And that's why these games are often called communication, or this is often called, assurance. An assurance game. It's meaning that you want to find some way to reassure your partner that you're really going to go for the same. Yeah, despite all the obvious risks. And they need to be reassured simultaneously that you will do the same. And this turns out not to be so simple in nature, because you need some credible way to signal these intents, and there might be conflicts over things, there might be differential risks. So just adding communication doesn't always solve these games. It gets even harder if you scale this game up to big groups. So say you need a group of 10 to go after the stack, or anthropologists like myself, we like to study people who go whale hunting, right? So how many people do you need to get a whale? Rough guess. 2? 3? Yeah. It takes a lot. And some specialized equipment. You need somebody who owns a boat. Not everybody has a boat. You need somebody with a harpoon, right? There's a bunch of stuff that goes into this sort of labor. And all those individuals need to be assured that the other necessary individuals will show up and do their jobs. And so there's a lot of politics that goes into this sort of labor in human societies. Other animals have their own politics that is mainly opaque to us, right? But just as interesting. And also deal with assurance games of this kind. As the group get bigger and bigger, these assurance games become incredibly difficult to solve. Because it only takes one defector, right? One individual who's like, well, they're not defecting, it's just that they're like, this is too risky, Richard's in that group and I'm just not sure if he's going to show up. And so then their dominant move is not to show up either, and the whole thing collapses, right? It's like a bank run. Yeah, if you know what a bank run is. Yeah, question?
Yeah. I would expect that the higher the reward, the large B with respect to the small b, that more people would want to be risky, but it's not the case.
No, it is. It is. So this is, so let me go through it again. I understand what's going on. So this is an unstable point. So if you want risky to evolve, you want it over here. You don't want it close to risky, because it's the distance, it's the range of the line segment between the point and risky that is the basin of attraction for risky. That's all the values of P, which natural selection will sweep up to the far right. Yeah? And so if you make the bottom of this big, this moves to the left, and then the whole line segment ends up favoring risky. Yeah? It's got to flip. Yeah, it's the opposite of this, right? It's the inverse of what you think about. With a stable equilibrium, it gets closer to the pure result. The more of it is present. But this is unstable, so it defines this fission point in the population. Yeah, is that clear? This is weird, so it's this deeply weird area of scholarship. Yeah, I understand that. Other questions? Okay, I think we're on track here. It's amazing. Okay. What do I want to do next? Wood. All right, and basins of attraction. Excellent. Let me introduce one more game, and then I think it'll be time for a 10-minute break. Yeah? You feel like you need it? I do. Yeah. Okay. I think some of you can imagine what it's like to teach a course like this, right? That you're taking it. There's lots of streams in my head when I'm teaching a course like this. Yeah, it's a very interesting exercise. Okay, so let's do another game. So what's the reason? So at the start today, I reminded you of Hawk Dove, and I tried to convince you it's actually a cooperation game. Okay, then I introduced a version of it that really smells like cooperation, that allowed me to introduce this really famous, almost perfect cooperation dilemma called the prisoner's dilemma, where you've got this perfect opposition between or complete opposition between the individual interests and the group interests. And the prisoner's dilemma has been studied tons. It's just, do not Google it. You're going to get millions and millions of hits, right, on the prisoner's dilemma. It's just a massive literature expanding at the speed of light, constantly. Every moment, someone is submitting a preprint about the prisoner's dilemma. Yeah, it's really a tragedy of brain power loss, I think. But no, it's important, but there's lots of other stuff, is what I want to convince you, about cooperation that are just as interesting. And so the stag hunt is the first example. It's about cooperation. It's about the group realizing joint benefits, that is, finding some way to evolve the risky option. But the problem is completely different. Yeah, the problem is this assurance problem, as we call it. Right? And now I want to introduce another kind of problem it's not really an assurance problem, but it's something called a coordination problem in a more classic sense. So, in a pure coordination game, you have a situation where there's just two behavioral options, and you can label these whatever you want, but just for the sake of minimizing mental friction, I'm going to call them safe and risky again. But now we're going to define safe differently. We're going to say that both of these options require cooperation. You have to do them jointly. So the pair has to have the same skill set and have the same intention to go after them. So if you both choose safe, you get little b. If you mismatch, you both get 0. Right? Because one of you, it's like you exchange text messages the night before the hunt, and then in the morning you have to show up at the right place. Yeah? And you miscommunicate, and so, you show up in the parking lot of the Max Planck Institute with your snare, and your friend is in the woods getting gored by a stag or something like that. Yeah. And it's 0 in both cases. Yeah, these zeros don't have to be the same, but I just want to keep it easy. Yeah, they could be, one could be negative. Yeah, and then if you both choose risky, you both get big B. Now, there's a pure version of this where you just write little b in both of these places. And in that case, it just doesn't matter what you do. The group is indifferent. But I don't think that's very interesting, because I don't think it happens very often. Yeah, where it's just completely arbitrary. There are some things like this, like, as you all know, in some countries, people drive on the wrong side of the road. Like everybody. Yeah, you've been to England? My God, madness, rains. It's just, they're all on the wrong side of the road all the time. Crossing the street is deadly, right? You always look the wrong way, right? It's just madness. Someone fix that island. Yeah, I'm going to get hate mail from English people. It's okay. I can take it. Bring it up. But no, I mean, but it's arbitrary, right? In the sense, which is the right side and the wrong side of the road. For the most part, I mean, you have some very strange argument about, well, most of the human population is right-handed, and that creates this minimal bias. But come on, I've driven in countries on both the left and the right. You switch really quickly. I mean, it's not hard at all to relearn. Yeah, after a couple days, if you survive the initial adjustment, then it's very quick, very, very, very fast, right? I did my PhD work in Tanzania, which has the British system, right? And after a couple days, I survived and I was fine. It was absolutely just fine. Of course, the driving there is chaotic for other reasons, yeah, but I should stop before I get hate mail from multiple countries. But anyway, that would be a case where it's little b in both, because as long as you coordinate, as long as everybody chooses left or right, it's really almost entirely symmetric. It doesn't make any difference. But most scenarios, I think, are not like that. In most scenarios, there really are differences for the collective benefits that come from the different conventions. So think about, well, this is a case where it's choice of what to forage, and you have to cooperate to do it, and some options are just really better. So that's a very simple one. If you start thinking about big social groups where there are lots of coordination incentives, right? Like you have to keep the group together, but individuals in a group have conflicts over where they want to go. But the group is going to stick together. So this is all primates, almost all primates, right? Except for the weird ones on Madagascar that live by themselves. Yeah. But socially healthy primates. No, Alphorosinian people are going to get mad at me. But or human societies, the integrity of the group is extremely important for lots of functions that we're not thinking of in the coordination thing. But these coordination games are getting played at the same time, and so it really does matter which you choose, and it might matter differently for the different individuals. Some individuals might prefer the risky option, and others might prefer the safe option. Does that make sense? So these are difficult problems, even though they look simple in some sense. And they have evolutionary dynamics that we will now draw out. Okay, so let's do the analysis, and then we'll take a break. Okay, so same thing. When is safe, stable? When safe is common, it gets little b. A rare risky gets 0. So always, yeah. I can try to do this. Some more fancy orange. Yeah. When is risky? Stable. And I can tell from your board expressions you've already solved this. Good, I'm pleased. Yeah. Your boredom pleases me. I shouldn't say that, but so when risky is common, it's big B now, and that is also greater than 0. And so both of these are stable, like in the stack hunt. Yeah. But the details are different. The reason you get 2 stable strategies at the end is different. Different mechanism than you had in the stack hunt. Right? There's no safe option here, really. In the stag hunt, one of the behaviors is sort of inviolable, right? It's invulnerable to whatever the other individual does. And that's not true in a coordination game. In a coordination game, everybody has an incentive to figure out what the other individual does. Okay. Again, there's going to be something like this going on. So let's figure it out. This is a good exercise for you, yeah? You like watching me do algebra? Yeah? Okay. So, the average fitness of, let's let P be the proportion risky. So the average fitness of risky, I should say, internal equilibrium. The average fitness of risky in a population where proportion P by risky is P times big B plus 1 minus P 0. Right? You're imagining you're risky and then you're writing your average payoff. You met an individual, you don't know their strategy. What do you think you're going to get on average if you knew P? And this is the mathematical expression. So, yeah? Or if you want to think about it empirically, this helps some people think about the expression too. You imagine there are a bunch of pairs in which at least one of the individuals is playing risky. And you empirically measure the payoffs to the risky individuals in those pairs, and you take the average. This is the expression for it, right? Because in P of those pairs, the riskies get big B, and in 1 minus P of them, the riskies get 0. And so the arithmetic average payoff of all the riskies is this. Does that help? Yeah. This needs to be equal to the analogous expression for safe. And for safe, P at a time, they get risky and they get 0. 1 minus P at a time, they get little b. It's perfectly symmetric. Yeah? Except for the case that big B is better. And then we can solve this. So this is P big B is equal to 1 minus P little b. This is, if you haven't caught on, this is why I like to make one entry in every payoff matrix 0. It's perfectly fine, right? 0, it solves problems, you know. Thanks to the, I don't know which Hindu mathematician it was that invented the 0, but it was a wonderful invention. Yeah, brought to Europe by the Arabs, great thing. It solves a bunch of problems. And so always make something 0. It solves a lot of problems for you. And so this is P, B, we've got a, I should not race ahead, I've been told. Yeah, collect the P's. BB plus B equals little b, and so this implies that the equilibrium point is at b over little b plus b. Right here. And now I will draw a really compressed version of that diagram and what remains in my board. Good? All right, so you get a different expression. So what? Well, but it has very similar qualitative properties. So this is the risky, this is safe. We've got some point in here. I'll just draw it right in the middle. B equals B over B plus B. And again, it's unstable because evolution dynamics near this point move it away. And if you get perturbed to the right of it, you'll flow all the way up to the population being all risky, which is good, right? Because this is when the population does best. But if you get perturbed below it, then you flow all the way to the left, which is not extinction, but it's worse. Yeah. And so again, we have this dilemma, but the mechanisms are different. This coordination problem going one way or the other. Lots of things. So there's this big literature on animal communication. And animal communication has a lot of coordination dynamics in it, right? So, because the problem is, you just make up a noise, the other individuals need to understand it. Right? So there's this automatic coordination problem, and so it's difficult for signs and signals to invade populations. You need some learning process to solve this problem. And so it's not simple, and there's a bunch of work in animal communication that tries to deal with that basic coordination dilemma in speaking, right? Right, we live in Europe, we know this, right? About language is a big coordination mechanism. Yeah, we face it every day. Yeah, and so I think that's a really cool thing about studying coordination is that it happens anytime you've got social groups, just because individual social groups often send signals to one another, and that creates coordination incentives. Yeah? Okay, so I want to summarize, yeah, domains of attraction, basins of attraction, again. Okay, let's take 10 minutes. Why don't you come back at 10 after the hour? So it's like 13 minutes. I'm feeling nice. And when you come back, I'm going to introduce a solution to some of this stuff, something called assortment. Okay. Welcome back from break. So before the break, I reintroduced Hawk Dove, convinced you it's a cooperation game, and then I introduced 3 explicitly cooperation games, and we solved their evolutionary dynamics. And in each one, you felt hope drain from your body, right? At least that was my goal, is to make you feel like evolution of cooperation is a really hard problem, right? How could we ever get natural selection to favor the increased when rare of a cooperative strategy? And in these games, it doesn't look very good, does it? But we know empirically that there's lots of cooperation in animal societies. And so we want to be able to interpret that. And there's multiple interpretations. Now, just because cooperation is present, that doesn't mean that the species has reached the optimum from a group perspective. There's still conflicts. So that's the first thing to think about. But if you're going to test that hypothesis, you still need to think about how these things could increase when rare. Because obviously they do sometimes. We do get cooperation to increase. Yeah? So just to offer an example that some people think is silly, but I don't. Parents care for their offspring. Very cooperative behavior, right? Because offspring are terrible. Yeah, really. You've been around children? I have a son, so I'm making fun of myself here. But so it's proof that natural selection can design a brain so that you don't kill them, right? Instead, you raise them so that they're functioning adults, even though they're really difficult sometimes, offspring, right? It'd be worse if you were a bird. Have you ever been around a bird nest when they're hungry? Yeah, I don't know how birds deal with that. I just fly away. Like, done. This is too loud. I'm out. No, but so that's cooperation, and that evolves, right? And that's a case that's a classical case to think about how parental care evolves, because there are lots of species that don't do any parental care at all. Yeah, and so obviously natural selection adjusts it, but it's highly cooperative because the adult is paying an individual cost and creating a shared benefit. Yeah. Okay. So we have to understand how this stuff works. All right, so let's give ourselves some space here. And we're going to think now about a phenomenon known as positive assortment. This is bad terminology, but it's standard in the literature. And it is my duty as an instructor to teach you terminology that is in the literature, even if I hate it. So this is one of these cases. Okay, so what does this mean, positive assortment? This means that cooperative strategies meet more often than chance, which is vague, and I will define it mathematically. Just hang on. But the qualitative idea is, in all these previous models I've drawn up, when we've written average payoffs, to determine who the focal individual is paired with, I just plucked a random individual from the population, irrespective of their strategy. I made no consideration of the focal individual strategy at all. Just like there's a big bag of animals, and I just pull one out at random, right? Well mixed, you shake it, and we pull out a hawk, something like that. And that's how we determine these expressions. We're going to violate that now. We're going to say there's some mechanism that makes it such that strategies positively assort, so that the same strategy is more likely to meet itself in pairs. It's not guaranteed to meet itself. Again, I'm going to make this into a mathematical expression so we can analyze it, but this is the general idea. There are lots of mechanisms that can produce assortment, and we're going to study them in the next weeks. Today, I'm just going to do it in a general statistical version of assortment that would apply in a vague, hand-wavy way to a bunch of specific biological mechanisms. And in the later weeks, we're going to actually study individual mechanisms. Okay? Yeah?
What is the difference between positive assortment and a higher P for cooperative strategy?
That's a great question. So the question was, what's the difference between positive assortment and just a larger value of P for the cooperative ones? So no matter how common the cooperative strategy is, there's still no assortment because the probability the cooperative strategy meets a cooperative strategy is just proportional to its frequency in the population. But that's assortment only in the weakest sense. There's no process that's actually biasing who meets who. It's completely random. It's like gas molecules just bouncing into one another. And what I'm arguing here is that there are lots of mechanisms in real animal societies where that is violated. And there are a bunch of mechanisms that the biologists study that can do this. Simplest one, you can just have spatial assortment, right? So, if you're born next to your brothers and sisters, and they share genotypes with you, then you don't need anything other than animals move only a certain distance in their lives to create some statistical correlation between the genotypes of neighbors. Yeah? So sometimes called viscosity, which is another one of those words that I do not like, but I must teach you. Right? It's the idea the population is viscous. It's like animals are moving through molasses or something, and they can't move very far. That works really well for plants. Plants are also social. I'm not going to talk about them a lot in this class. Do we have any botanists here? Kaisa's in the field. We have a botanist in my department, but she's in the field right now. So plants are highly social. They engage in all kinds of cooperative and conflict games. They poison the soil, right? I mean, they're just nasty, just as nasty as animals. They're just moving in slow motion. Yeah, and so from their perspective, we're like gnats that just fly through their lives, right? But seeds have little wings on them, so they disperse because it adjusts the amount of viscosity in the population. And there's this result that my goal of which is to teach you in the 5th week, the last week. There's this cool result about how far plants want their offspring to disperse, why they want their seeds to go away, right? There's a weird social dilemma involved in that hopefully your curiosity has been aroused, and I will resolve it for you in the 5th week. Yeah, but plants are extremely social and diabolical. Yeah, and just as much as animals. Also famously, kinship. This spatial assortment argument is not distinct entirely from kinship arguments. Yeah, kin selection arguments. Although the mechanisms can be different. So one of the things you can get attention is kin recognition, yeah, where it's not just that you're close to the other individual and so there's a correlation in strategies, it's that you genotype your neighbors. And there are organisms that do this, yeah. Most of them live in the ocean. But there are organisms that actually genotype their neighbors and then fuse their physiologies, right? These like sea squirt things, yeah. I think they're all nidarians, right? Those of you know what nidarians are. But so there are organisms that do that. But primates have some kin recognition strategies probably too. Yeah. There's a literature on this that's interesting. Okay. You can also have. This is going to be imprecise, but this is going to be the topic of the next lecture, which, just to remind you, is not next week, because next week is fall break. And it's not the week after that, because that's still fall break, because this is Saxony. And we take 2 weeks off so we can harvest our fields. Yeah. True story. And so then the week after that, which is November already, I think, right? When we meet again, I'm going to give you a lecture on what I call the evolution of relationships, which is all about repeat interactions between the same individuals. And often this is called reciprocity, the study of reciprocity. And that also creates positive assortment between cooperative strategies, or it can, under certain circumstances. But the mechanism is radically different, yeah? Because the assortment happens as a consequence of how you adjust how you react to a person, having learned how they treat you. Does that make sense? Humans get this, right? You understand how this works. Yeah. It's like, what have you done for me lately? Yeah. Sort of. Do people still do that? I do. Okay. So, and there's other stuff. In structured populations, I'm just going to put population structure here. Structured populations, tons of interesting things can happen with movement and contingent movement and lots of interesting things that can happen. The way benefits scale. There's a whole theoretical literature on trying to understand this. Most of these things are special cases of positive assortment, but the details are different, and those details sometimes matter. The goal today is just to give you an idea how introducing positive assortment changes the evolutionary dynamics of these games. Okay? And I've got 40 minutes to do it. All right. Let's do it. I didn't want to erase that, did I? The goal is to keep the patrol game. Yes. Okay. So, rest and patrol. All right. So let's revisit the patrol game. And I think I've got. Oh yeah. That's clean. Yeah. All right. We have very good staff here. So they anticipate that I'm a dirty board worker. Okay, so what we need is some way to take this payoff matrix and write fitness expressions that include some kind of assortment. So we're going to have a model of assortment in which the probability that patrol meets another patrol. So this is capital P for probability, and then I've just written patrol, and this vertical line is called a type in typography, but you want to read it as conditional on. Yeah, so what's the probability you meet a patrol conditional on being patrolled? That make sense? So you're in the second position, or the focal individual's in the second position. And so far, that has just been the frequency of patrol. Up to this point, that has just been P. And that's no assortment, right? That's well-mixed bag of hawks and doves, and you pull one out. We're going to do something different. Yeah? What we're going to do now is we're going to introduce a new symbol. It's going to be little r for devious reasons. So I will keep private for now and review in a later lecture. A little r. And r is the probability of assorting. Yeah, it's a number between 0 and 1. When the assortment process works, then you always meet the same type. So there's a probability r that you meet the same type through assortment. And then the rest of the time, when you don't assort, you you get a random draw of the well mixed bag of hawks and doves. Yeah, or in this case, rest and patrol. So the probability a patrol meets another patrol is R plus 1 minus RP. So just to pause and think about this for a second, if we make R 0, we get back our previous model, right? Because this simplifies to P. And if we make R 1, then it's 1. Yeah, because this term goes away. Right? And then you'd always assort. We also need an expression for the probability that you meet a rest, conditional on being patrol. And that must be 1 minus R, 1 minus P. Now I'll explain why. So, the boring mathematical reason is because that's the leftover probability mass. Yeah, these two things sum to 1, right? And you have to meet somebody. So, but that doesn't give you any kind of visceral understanding about what's going on. So R at the time you meet the same type. If that doesn't happen, 1 minus R at the time, there are two things that could happen. P at the time, you meet the same type anyway, just by chance. 1 minus P at the time, you meet rest. And so that's why we get the other branch, 1 minus R, 1 minus P over here. So it looks like if you draw it out like a probability tree, right? So R at the time, you meet the same type, right? And then it's patrol, patrol, yeah. 1 minus R at the time, two things happen. P at the time, you get a patrol result anyway, and 1 minus P at the time, you get a patrol paired with the rest. And this tree is these two expressions. Does that help anyone? Yeah? I'm always trying out new stuff up here, you know. Okay. Yeah? If something's not clear, you should just, make a noise at me. That's, again, I remind you, the reason I teach this course with chalk is so that it can be responsive. Because I promise you, it's much harder to teach this with chalk than making the slides ahead of time and then just flying through them, right? Because then I don't have to think while I'm teaching. This is much harder. Yeah, I'm exhausted, right? Drink a Red Bull and take a nap. That sort of thing, right? Okay, now what we want to do is write expressions for invasion. So, what we need is, let's consider now the when patrol can be stable. Yeah, we start there. Does that make sense? We're going to analyze the game again. Nothing new, but we're going to use these expressions to do it. So we're going to say, and this is what's called the statistical assortment model. I haven't told you how R gets a value. We need more biology to say that, but that's later. That's other lectures, okay? Right now we're just going to say, if R can take on in some range of values, what value does it need to be to change the evolutionary dynamics? And so now we ask again, when is patrol stable? Yeah. So we need to write the average fitness of patrol when it's common. There's nothing new here, right? When it's common, it's going to meet itself. Yeah, that's all that's going to happen. And so, or to draw it all out, I have to decide what order I'm going to do this in. Let's just say it's common, it's going to meet itself, right? It's the rare rest that we have to worry about now, because now there's assortment. Yeah? And so, yeah, there might be one common patrol individual who meets the invading rest individuals, but it's negligible because it's such a small part of the average fitness of patrol. But for the rare rest individuals, nothing is negligible. Right? Everything that happens to them determines whether their average fitness is greater than this, and that's what we need to ask. So what's the expected fitness of a rare invading rest? Well, we need to apply this logic to rest. And so a rare invading rest gets, well, R at the time, it meets another rest individual. So you have to imagine there's more than one, but they're in small numbers. Yeah. And we're going to let P be the proportion of patrol. And so a rare invading rest meets itself and gets 0, r plus 1 minus r, 1 minus p at a time. Hang on, I'll talk you through this. Yeah? I see the expressions, and I appreciate what's going on. Yeah? I have flipped, right, what's going on. So now, p is the frequency of patrol, so 1 minus p is the frequency of rest. So r the time assortment works on rest 2. It doesn't want to meet itself, but assortment is a cruel master. Yeah? And so for non-cooperative strategies, assortment's bad, right? When assortment fails, they still meet themselves 1 minus p at a time. However, p is approximately 1, right? You with me? Why is p approximately 1? Because patrol is common. So we can put a 1 there. Now this is 0, but the whole thing is 0 because there's a 0 there. And now you're saying, why is Richard doing this to us? And so did you see this, the logic of writing the expression? Because the next one will not cancel, right? But does that, so effectively, r of the time, they get 0. If they even when you're rare, if you assort, you can still encounter the same strategy when you're in small numbers if assortment is strong enough. And so when you redo these models with assortment, you get these r's in here that matter. So we end up with the invading fitness of a rare rest is r0, and yes, that's going to cancel, but you want to think through the logic of it, because the 0 doesn't have to be there, plus 1 minus r, p, right, because assortment failed, now it meets a patrol, but p is approximately 1. So I can just get rid of that, yeah? And then you get the payoff, which is b minus c. Is that okay? We're going to do more of this, so hang on. Yeah? There are thinking expressions up there. So let me run through it again. We're writing the invader fitness, and the invader fitness comes from this logic. So for the invading rest, 2 things can happen. Either it manages to assort with itself, which happens r at a time, in which case it gets 0, or it doesn't assort, in which case it meets the common type strategy, because there's nothing else that can happen if you dip into when it doesn't assort, there's just a big bucket of well-mixed patrol and rest, and it's all patrol. Yeah? Yeah? Does that make some sense? And so if it assorts, it gets 0 because it meets itself, and this is the payoff it gets when it assorts. If it doesn't assort, it meets a patrol, and, gets B. And you guys gotta check me, right? So it gets B because it meets a patrol. And it gets the benefit of being in a group with a patroller. It doesn't patrol itself. Yeah? You with me? There's going to be more examples of this. There's going to be another one in a second. Okay, so we can simplify this, right? So this just becomes b minus c has to be greater than 1 minus r b. Yeah? So let's simplify. B minus c minus 2 has to be greater than b minus rb. Let's move the rb over here. And these b's cancel. And that's c over 2. rb has to be greater than c over 2. Well, just your spider sense is tingling, right? Yeah. We'll do a couple of lectures. Or you could write this as r has to be greater than c over 2b. Doesn't look so aesthetic, does it? But it's true. What does this mean? Well, the ratio of cost to benefit is what matters for how much assortment we need. And this can be satisfied when c is greater than b, right? When it's a prisoner's dilemma. So remember, when c is greater than b, the patrol grain is a prisoner's dilemma. At all frequencies of patrol, the individual is better off resting. But if there's assortment, that's not necessarily true. If there's assortment, patrol can be evolutionarily stable, we've just proven, as long as r is sufficiently large so that this is satisfied. Yeah? The c could be greater than b, and this can still be true because you've got a 2 on the bottom. Yeah? So what would be an example? Like c is 3 and b is 2, then this is 3/4. So that's a lot of assortment, but it's logically possible. Does this make sense? So this is a logical demonstration of the power of assortment. It's when the cooperative strategy is common, which is all I've explored so far. I'm going to do the flip side next, in the next column here. Then assortment hurts the non-cooperative invader because it meets itself more often than chance. Right? There's a few mutant rests trying to get a foothold, but they're interacting with one another, and so they're in groups that don't patrol, and so they can't invade. That makes sense? Now let's do the flip side, and this will be another chance. I'll write expressions like this again with the same logic, and that's another chance for you to get it. Okay. Now, when is rest stable? Same idea. What does rest get when it's common? It gets nothing. Yeah? So nothing needs to be greater than something. It's a question of what that something is going to be and how to write it. So again, same kind of logic. We think about what happens to a rare patrol individual. Two things can happen. So when are they going to... First one is this circumstance. They meet themselves, r plus 1 minus r, p of the time. Yeah? But p is approximately 0 now. So that is r. Yeah? So if they assort, then they have a nice patrol party, and they get b minus c over 2. You with me? Yeah? So they manage to assort. You've got a pair of patrol now. They're rare, and so the assortment only happens r of the time. There's no 1 minus r term because patrol is rare. So they can't meet any other way except through assortment. It's exactly the same thing that happened to poor rest over here, right? Except its assortment worked the other direction. The rest of the time, they don't assort, and then they get b minus c. Because they end up in a pair with a rest. And then their payoff is b minus c, which is right here. Yeah? They still patrol, because that's what they do. But they pay the greater cost. Good? Remind you, if this is not totally clear yet, the next thing I'm going to do is we're going to do the mix in the middle, right? And then we're going to have even bigger expressions. You have yet another chance to be a little bit confused. But the whole goal is to work you through it by giving you different contexts to confront this statistical assortment model. And then, because I'm a nice guy, I have a homework problem for you, which requires you to use the statistical assortment model. Yeah, and then that's when you really understand this stuff. So this is a bit of a digression, but I think it's important to give students expectations about this material. It's essentially impossible to understand technical material like this instantaneously. Yeah, you take notes on it and you know where you're confused, and then you practice it. And the way I learned this stuff was reading papers, right, and trying to learn models from papers, and that was a nightmare, right? I've been in therapy for years. It's a consequence of that. So I'm trying to create a better on-ramp for you that doesn't involve that darkness. But because scientific papers is the worst place to learn anything, right? Is a journal, right? Sorry, but any editors watching this, I'm sorry. But but you really don't have to understand everything the first time you meet the material. It's a chance for you to map out what you don't understand and then focus on practicing that stuff. Yeah, this is how skills like this work. So you just have to be patient with yourself. Okay, so when is this true? Yeah, so let's do some algebra, because that's what we do in this class. Yeah, so we've got, let's make it in terms of r, like the other one. So let's collect the r's. Yeah, so what have we got? We've got b minus c over 2 r's, and then we've got a minus b plus c r's from there. Sorry, I'm skipping steps. This is very bad of me. People have scolded me for this before, and I'm a sinner. I don't know what to say. And then we want to move the other stuff to the other side. Wait, it goes the other way, doesn't it? This is less than. So, and then the other side gets a Yeah, C minus B, is that right? That is right. Yeah, so this is the condition for rest to be stable. Yeah. And then we can cancel, so those B's cancel. Oh, look at that, this is nice. Yeah, very exciting. And then we've got, that's C over 2, yeah? C minus C over 2, C over 2. And that needs to be less than C minus B. Where did the C minus B come from? It's the 1 right here. Yeah, I moved it to the other side. Sorry, I do algebra as a recreational hobby at home, so it's just like all the time. So you skip steps. It's very bad when I'm doing instruction. So I will try to make all the steps explicit. And then we just divide by this. So we get R less than, how do we want to express this? 2 C minus B over C. Does that look? Which is 2, 1 minus B over C. Does that look aesthetic? Yeah, maybe this is not. I'm trying to isolate the ratio of benefits to cost to show you that that's what's governing it. Yeah, that's why I factored it this way. Just the weird thing about mathematical theory is you get the final theorem and you can rearrange it in lots of different ways. And they're technically the same, but they feel different. Yeah, and this is part of the qualitative goals of mathematical analysis. You're trying to structure the final result in a way that it speaks to the reader. Yeah, and teaches them something qualitative about the process. And so it often means factoring it so you can isolate ratios of variables, because in these cooperation models, B and C, typically all that matters is their ratio. And that's why the ratio is what appears together in all our results. It's just, the absolute values of B and C don't matter, it's just their relative values. And so that's why I'm going through all these Olympics to get them into a single term. Yeah? You work on cooperation models enough, you know that you're going to do that, you just do it from the beginning. You just make C over B a number, right? You just call it K. That's the ratio of cost to benefit. You define the whole model in terms of that, and then it saves you a bunch of algebra. Yeah, but that would be a bad way to do an intro course, I assert. Okay, so what does this mean? If R is less than this, and this is some number, then rest can be stable. So what does that mean? For rest to be stable, there can't be too much assortment. How much assortment? Well, the amount is defined by the ratio of benefits to cost. So again, this can be a case where C can be greater than B, and this can be satisfied. So like say, what would be an example of this? How do we make this work? So if it's a half, the whole thing blows up, right? And then it's less than 1, and it's always true. So we need it to be something like 3/4. So if B is 3 and C is 4, then that's 3/4, and this is a fourth, and 2 times a fourth is a half, and then R needs to be less than a half. Did I do that too fast? I mean, yeah, I'll do it again. So if B is 3 and C is 4, then the benefit is less than the cost, which makes this a prisoner's dilemma, which remember is a hopeless situation. Doom. Yeah, Armageddon. Right? 1 minus 3/4 is 1/4. 2 times 1/4 is a half. R less than a half is the requirement. Yeah, and that's the threshold. If there's more assortment than that, then rest is not evolutionarily stable, and rare patrol can invade, which is cool, to speak technically. Yeah. Is that good? Does this make sense? Yeah? Okay, there's enough, there's expressions I'm looking for, like, yeah, you're willing to humor me a little bit longer, sort of expressions, good. So, that's the qualitative impact of assortment, is that it can destabilize non-cooperative strategies, yeah, and it can stabilize cooperative strategies when they otherwise wouldn't be stable. It also moves the basins of attraction, sometimes quite a lot, yeah? So let's think about this. How much time do I have? Yeah, I got time. Let's think about this in the context of the stag hunt, so that I can give you another example you can work with. And then you have another chance to understand what's going on here. So remember the stag hunt? Very quickly, we've got safe and risky, safe and risky. Safe always gets little b. Risky gets 0 when it does it by itself, and it gets big B when it pairs with itself. Yeah? Now let's reanalyze this exactly like I did this. I'm setting you up for your homework problem. Right? Okay? Basically showing you how to do your homework. Yeah. So, when can risky invade a population? That's the interesting question. Yeah? We also want to know when it's stable, but it was already stable. Yeah? It was stable without assortment. So we don't need to ask that question. For completeness, you might want to, but it's going to be stable, I promise you. It was already stable. The question is, when it's rare, can it invade? Could assortment do that in this model? So let's figure that out analytically. And to do that, we've got to ask what payoff it gets when it's rare. Yeah? And we're going to use the same logic again. This is the statistical assortment model, same expressions, new payoff matrix. So we construct expressions the same way, but we have different payoffs now coming into it. So, what does risky get when it's rare and it does assortment? Well, if it assorts R at a time, right, so this is what's going on. It assorts, or it doesn't assort and it meets itself by chance, but P is 0 because it's rare. Yeah? Why don't I just write the whole thing out? The average fitness of risky is meets itself, right? Risky meets risky, plus zero, right? And this is safe, conditional, risky. Yeah? So this is the probability it meets itself in general for any value of P. Right? It assorts, or it doesn't, and it gets lucky because it wants to meet itself. Yeah? In which case it gets big B. Or it doesn't assort, and it meets the safe strategy, in which case it gets 0. This is the general average fitness of risky in the assortment model. And I just use those two expressions over there. That's it. That's the whole model. Yeah? And with this, we can ask the invasion questions. So then we ask, okay, P is approximately 0. So let's simplify the expression just by putting 0 in where P is. It's magic. Again, whatever Hindu mathematician invented 0, this is fantastic. It was a Hindu mathematician, was it? Is this all from Sanskrit? I forget where 0 was invented. Any historians of mathematics here? All right, I'll receive letters. Someone will tell me. That's what's great about recording yourself. So, so this just becomes R, right? You see, if that's 0, then this just becomes RB. Isn't that nice? Yeah. Plus 1 minus R times 0. And that needs to be greater than the fitness of a common of the common safe, right? And what's common safe get? It gets B. It always gets B. It doesn't matter. This is what makes this model easy. Nothing affects safe. So it has to be greater than little b. All right, so we just require that R be greater than little b over big B. That is what? That's the condition for rare, risky. If you remember, is the strategy that maximizes the benefit to the group to invade. Previously it couldn't. It could never invade because safe was always stable in this game. Yeah? Remember, this is the assurance game. When you add assortment, if you've got enough of it, it kind of creates assurance. Yeah, without any signaling. Yeah, there's assortment going on. So if big B is big enough, say this is 1 over 10, then you don't need very much assortment. Yeah, to get this to work. Just 1/10 of the time, you meet the same type, and that's enough to make it work. It's not a big requirement. But if little b is a large fraction of this, like this is 1 over 2, then it's a little bit more negative feeling, right? And that's very, very difficult. Okay, now let's do the internal mix. And that's the last thing we're going to do, and then I'm going to explain your homework. Okay? And then we've got 2 weeks for you to do that homework at the slowest speed you want to do it. Okay? Where is the internal equilibrium? So now we're going to take these general expressions. We're going to write one for the other strategy as well, or for rest, but you already have. Yeah, so it's pretty easy. We set them equal to one another and then we solve for p. So let's do that. We've got r plus 1 minus r p big B 0. This equals little b. Yeah, because what's going to make this model easy is that safe always gets B. It doesn't matter. It's asocial. Yeah, it's a completely asocial strategy. There's no frequency dependence for safe. That's why it's called safe. Yeah, it's immune to frequency dependence. But risky is not. So risky gets this. This is the probability with which it's going to meet itself, and that's the only time it gets anything that's not 0. That's why I put a 0 in the matrix. Yeah, and then it gets big B. Do you understand why this is the statement we want? Right. So this is the expected fitness change for an individual who pursues the risky strategy when they get big B. You think of this as the probability they get big B. Otherwise, they get 0, and that is going at equilibrium. There's some value of P which makes this equal to little b, and that will be the equilibrium point. We've got this line where it's all risky, all safe, and there's going to be some point on here. Yeah. And that's what we're looking for, the point where they're equalized. So now we can solve for P. So what do we got? We've got RB plus 1 minus R PB equals little b. Oh yeah, this works. Yeah. So this is going to be b minus r big P over 1 minus r. Okay, so this is P equals b minus rb over 1 minus rb. And you're looking at that and you're like, what the hell is that? Okay, so let me interpret it for you. I'm here. I'm your algebra interpreter. This expression is the value of P on this line, right? So I can draw it anywhere I like, right? Say it right here. I can just label it. B minus R big B over 1 minus R big B. Just some point here. And it defines the domains of attraction, remember, of each of these things. Yeah, and all the dynamics here go this way, and the dynamics here go that way. And the question is, when you look at this, you want to think about adjusting the values of the variables so that you see how it slides around, and to understand the influence of it. So the first thing we do is let's just imagine there's no assortment. Set R to 0. If you set R to 0, this simplifies to B over B, little b over big B, which was the location in the previous model, right? So this is where the previous point was, say, over here, and it's just little b over big B. And what has happened is you increase R as it pushes it this way. Yeah, because it makes the top smaller. And that embiggens is the scientific word. It embiggens the flatten, right? So it embiggens the domain of attraction of the cooperative strategy, because that's what assortment does, is it benefits the cooperative strategy. Yeah, and the effect can be pretty dramatic. It all depends upon the details and the values of the bees, but that's the action of it. And we also care about that in these games, because remember, the size of the domain of attraction for the cooperative strategy gives you a qualitative outline on how plausible it is that long-run dynamics will land you in that range. Because there's a bunch of forces that we haven't modeled, like migration, remember? I'm a big fan of migration. But lots of forces that can move you around that are independent of selection. And so those perturbations will matter, and the bigger the domain of attraction for the cooperative outcome, the more perturbations get you in the cell, and then the more chances for natural selection to nudge you upwards. Yeah, for the good of all. Yeah? All right, I'm trying to end on a positive note. All right. Okay, a homework problem. Your homework is to do this for the pure coordination game that I showed you. Well, it's not a pure coordination game. Homework. So it's the payoff matrix. Again, I called it safe and risky, but it's this game. Remember? It used to be on the board. It's in the notes too. There's notes on the website. And I want you to analyze this game with the statistical assortment model, just like this. Do the stability conditions with assortment of both strategies. When is each stable in the presence of assortment? And find the internal unstable equilibrium. I promise you there is one. Yeah? And that's it. And the expressions are going to be different, but this is the structure. Okay? And yeah, on the website there are notes for this lecture in the same format as last week. I've also, the way I plan these lectures, those of you who have the misfortune of following me on Twitter, you already know this, right? You know too much about it, in fact. But I plan these lectures by taking a single piece of paper and a pencil. It's very high-tech, latest in graphite technology. And I just write the lectures on a piece of paper to figure out how I want to do this. And I scan those, and I have put those on the website too, if you find them interesting, as a portal into darkness. Yeah? No, but they represent to me like what I plan to put on the board. And it's like, there's typically 2 sheets of paper per lecture. And I'm just going to keep scanning those and putting them up. And maybe that's useful as a snapshot in how the lecture works. And all this stuff is on there too. Okay. Anybody want the last word? Yeah, Cody.
Quick question. So you showed the limit of the new model as the R goes to 0 to recover the same fixed point there, or the same point that separates the bases of attraction. What happens if R goes to 1? Does that P go to like negative infinity or something? Or
Oh, tricky, Cody. Yeah, very, very tricky. Well, now you have to take the limit in the proper way, right?
Uh-huh.
So this thing is gonna, how's this gonna work? So if R goes to 1,
you have the little b subtracting the big B, which I find weird in that definition for P.
there's a little b subtracting a big B.
Yeah, on the second to the last slide at the very bottom there, P equals little b minus R big B over 1 minus R big B.
You're talking about this expression.
Yeah.
Well, so, yeah, big B is greater than little b. So there's some value of R where they're equal. And at that point, this is 0. And that will typically happen before R equals 1.
Okay.
Right? So then you're off the... But you asked a very good question that I had not thought about. I don't think it's biologically relevant because there's some value of R which makes this negative. Yeah? Some large value of R, which makes this negative, and then you're over here. Yeah, you've already made the whole line the domain of attraction, but in principle, yeah, the denominator explodes. Yeah, but it's not, I don't think it's biologically relevant, but yeah. But I see what's going on there. Maybe you could come up with values of little b and big B where it is relevant, but I can't.
So as soon as you get to that point of R, where P ends up being 0, then it doesn't really matter what will happen after that.
Exactly. At that point, you're in a game where you should always do the risky thing. Yeah, because there's nothing left. Yeah, it's a good question, Cody. Yeah, I hadn't thought of that.
Except with both b's are equal, b equals 0.
If both b's are equal,
Yeah.
but big B is greater than little b. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean if they.
The point is, so this thing's moving to the left, and it's going to hit this point when b equals rb. Sorry, I'm saying b twice. When little b is equal to R big B. And that's the point. Before we get to Cody's problem, that will happen. And we're in a biological realm where natural selection always favors the risky option. Yeah, does that make sense? But you want to think about this. I didn't catch that when I designed the homework. Yeah. Okay. Questions? So again, to reiterate the homework. Just do this analysis, but for this game. It's got 2 zeros. Yeah. Good times. There are notes. We're not meeting the next 2 weeks, right? Because we take a break for fall break. Yeah. You're welcome, parents. And then we resume for the 3rd lecture in November. And it's on the 4th floor, I think we meet for that time. It's on the syllabus, right? I think, which is just 1 floor up in the other room, because this room is booked that time. Okay, with that, I thank you genuinely for your attention. I know this has been quite a journey, but when you come back next time, it's going to get even more fun. I promise you. Okay? So your brain will expand to meet the challenge. I know because I've taught this class many times. Hundreds and hundreds of students have grown to it. Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, also like